Why is a federal jobs guarantee better than a universal basic income?
I will tell you why. A simple reason. I think most people want to work. They want to be a productive member of society.
That was Senator Bernie Sanders explaining how his perspectives and solutions on economic conundrums differ from Andrew Yang's. Yang is a Washington outsider who propelled the unquestionably important issue of automation into this upcoming election. It's a topic that absolutely does need to be discussed, and I'm glad Yang pushed candidates to have this conversation. Now, Yang stands out as a unique candidate in the Democratic primary. If you haven't heard of him, I'm actually shocked you haven't if you're listening to this show. But it also probably means you haven't been on Twitter, where his supporters, also known as the Yang Gang, fiercely defend his universal basic income policy. While I'm not against UBI, I do have some concerns about how Yang wants to implement his plan, which he refers to as the Freedom Dividend. Keep in mind that both progressives and libertarians tend to be in favor of universal basic income, but they differ significantly in how it would be paid for and implemented. As with anything in politics, or life for that matter, the devil is in the details. So we're gonna get into those details right now, but before we do so, let me start out by saying that Yang has correctly identified severe inequalities and problems in America's economic system by calling out tech companies that pay nothing in taxes. According to Honda Wang at Jacobin, the monthly stipend, which Yang dubs the Freedom Dividend, is intended to ameliorate economic insecurity, wealth inequality, and the other symptoms of social malaise stemming from capitalism. Yang's intentions seem to be good, and he wants to provide $1,000 a month in guaranteed income to every American over the age of 18, regardless of income. The money is offered with no strings attached, meaning there are no restrictions on how individuals spend the money.
It's difficult to do if you have companies like Amazon, trillion-dollar tech companies paying literally zero in taxes while they're closing 30% of our stores. Now, we need to put the American people in position to benefit from all these innovations in other parts of the economy. And if we had a value-added tax at even half the European level, it would generate over $800 billion in new revenue, which combined with the money in our hands, it would be the trickle-up economy from our people, families, and communities up. We would spend the money and it would circulate through our regional economies and neighborhoods, creating millions of jobs, making our families stronger and healthier.
All right, so let's do this deep dive. There are a few issues with Yang's proposal. One of them is that his Freedom Dividend is not offered in addition to most other social safety net or government programs for the poor, including food stamps and welfare. Honda Wang continues to write in Jacobin that his UBI plan would replace existing social welfare benefits rather than build upon them. There are progressive cases for UBI, but Yang's version, unfortunately, isn't one of them. Yang seeks to fund his program in part by carving out social welfare programs, leaving beneficiaries to fend for themselves with just their UBI stipend. And if you pay close attention to Yang's rhetoric, you'll notice that he does have qualms with government programs meant to help the poor. He says, quote, "We currently spend between $500 and $600 billion a year on welfare programs, food stamps, disability, and the like. People already receiving benefits would have a choice, but would be ineligible to receive the full $1,000 in addition to current benefits." In fact, here's Yang on Fox Business making a similar point.
We're already spending hundreds of billions of dollars on 126 existing welfare programs, which would be largely consolidated. A lot of that would get replaced by this dividend because people would vastly prefer $1,000 in cash unconditional to the hodgepodge of benefits with administration and monitoring that they currently experience.
Look, saying that he wants to replace welfare programs is actually not a good sign and actually raises this libertarian red flag in my mind. And I'll explain why in just a second when we discuss how the Freedom Dividend would be paid for and how much it would actually be worth to people living in poverty. Yang's website clarifies that the only time his UBI offer could be stacked with other government programs is when someone is receiving Social Security or veterans disability benefits. But what if someone wasn't a member of the military but still has a disability that makes them ineligible for work? Yang's website indicates that under the Freedom Dividend, those who are legally disabled would have a choice between collecting SSDI and the Freedom Dividend or collecting SSDI and Social Security or SSI. That might sound okay, but consider that the estimated average Social Security disability benefit amount for a disabled worker receiving Social Security disability insurance in January of 2019 is $1,234 per month. Yang says that Americans would have the option to choose, but that's assuming that they have perfect information and they aren't persuaded or misled into taking his UBI offer instead. And honestly, it's not easy to get the average American the perfect information or for them to even crunch the numbers in a way that makes the option clear to them, especially because they'd have to consider the income they're losing through the way the Freedom Dividend is funded. So let me make my case. Yang would pay for universal basic income through a value-added tax. What exactly is a VAT tax? If you go to Yang's website, there's a brief explanation. Yang proposes funding UBI by consolidating some welfare programs and implementing a VAT tax of 10%. Current welfare and social program beneficiaries would be given a choice between their current benefits or $1,000 in cash unconditionally. A value-added tax is a tax on the production of goods or services a business produces. Well, who do you think that 10% value-added tax is passed on to? If you answered US consumers or the very people who would need UBI, you'd be correct. The issue with a value-added tax is that it's regressive taxation that disproportionately impacts the poor. So those most vulnerable would actually be paying more should UBI be implemented because of the way it's being funded. The fact that Yang focuses on paying for universal basic income through a regressive tax rather than specifically increasing taxes on the wealthy says something about where his priorities lie. It's also the reason why libertarians and the Cato Institute love UBI proposals like Yang's. As Current Affairs explains, because it's a tax on spending and poor people spend a greater percentage of their income than rich people spend, poor people have to pay a higher percentage of their income to fund the UBI compared to rich people. Yang kind of acknowledges this.
The great thing about a value-added tax is that it gets the money from where the money is. It's almost impossible to game. The knock on it, which is accurate, is that people with lower levels of income spend a higher proportion of their money on various consumer goods, and so a value-added tax proportionally hits them harder. Now, happily, you can do what many other countries have done, which is you scale the value-added tax based upon the nature of the goods you're looking at. So you could exempt various consumer staples or have a lower rate on various consumer staples, and you could really stick it to people who buy yachts or really expensive things.
All right, but let's get real for a moment. Under our current corrupt political climate, where the wealthy have gamed the system to the point where Amazon pays $0 in federal taxes, what would stop the rich from lobbying government to exempt luxury items from the VAT tax? Nothing. And if Yang acknowledges that the VAT tax can be devastatingly regressive and harmful for the country's poor, why hasn't he been clearer on what would be exempt from that tax? Shouldn't that be the first concern if helping the average American worker is your #1 priority? While Yang often cites how America's elites pay too little in taxes as one of his grievances in promoting UBI, he himself does not believe in a wealth tax, which is a non-regressive way to raise revenue for social programs. Here he is on Fox Business saying just that.
To me, the focus on income taxes is not the right way to go. And I'm going to use Jeff Bezos as an example. So Jeff started Amazon. He has over $100 billion in Amazon stock. Hasn't sold any.
Right.
And so there's no taxable event.
So a wealth tax.
No, so I think a wealth tax too is not the right way to go. What we have to do is we have to join every other advanced economy in the world and have a value-added tax.
Finally, let's address Yang's one-size-fits-all approach to UBI. The $12,000 he's offering annually doesn't vary based on where people are living. People living in lower cost parts of the country would get the exact same amount as people living in more expensive cities. If things play out the way Yang envisions and millions of Americans lose their jobs due to automation, how would someone in Los Angeles pay for housing, food, transportation, school, and clothing with $1,000 a month? Actually, we all know that if someone is relying on $12,000 a year anywhere in the country, it's still not enough to cover basic living expenses. Also, when you take the value-added tax into account as a way to pay for the plan, that $12,000 a year is actually worth even less because consumers have to pay more for goods. There's also a philosophical issue at play. Yang's solution is barely even a Band-Aid on a rigged economic system we have in place. We need broad structural changes to ensure we have an economy that works for everyone. Throwing $1,000 a month at a gushing wound that Americans are already struggling with isn't a long-term solution. As Jacobin's Honda Wang writes, Yang's version of UBI does not alter the imbalance of power in capitalism. He identifies the problems that are inherent to capitalism, yet somehow believes that the same market forces that create those problems can also fix them. Here's Senator Bernie Sanders on how he would deal with automation.
Technology and robotics and artificial intelligence are not unto themselves bad things if they work to benefit ordinary people. If all that they do is make the rich richer and CEOs even wealthier, if they cost us jobs and drive up corporate profits, that is not acceptable. So the challenge that we face is how do we use technology to improve the lives of working people? So if you have a terrible job, a boring job, and we make your job better and we enable you to work 20 hours a week rather than 40 hours a week, is that a bad thing? It is not a bad thing. But it means to say you still need to earn income to live by. We can't cut your salaries in half.
Right.
Now, one of the areas that we are working with, we take a very, a different approach to Mr. Yang, and that is, I believe, in a jobs guarantee. There are an enormous amount of work. There is an enormous amount of work that has to be done, all the way from childcare to healthcare, to education, to rebuilding our infrastructure, to combating climate change, to dealing with our growing elderly population. Enormous number of jobs out there. And I believe under a Sanders administration, what we would do is create those jobs, and as people lose their jobs, there will be other jobs available.
So Bernie tackles this from a more comprehensive approach, and he talks about some of the structural changes that are necessary so this economy isn't rigged against the average American worker. I want to delve into those details on next week's show. Now, Andrew Yang responded to Senator Sanders on Twitter, writing, quote, "It's very strange. He seemed open and warm to the idea of a universal basic income not too long ago. Now he seems irritated every time it comes up." I mean, Sanders didn't really seem irritated to me, but again, the devil is in the details. The way Bernie would pay for UBI wouldn't be on the backs of the working poor, and he also believes, again, in the broad structural changes that need to be reined in. So this economic system isn't rigged against the average American worker to the advantage of the corporate elite. It's not about small band-aids, but rather big picture reforms. You never have to miss another episode of No Filter by ringing the bell below. You'll get notified whenever we publish something new. And don't forget to join TYT and download the TYT Plus app today. Download our TYT Plus app on your iPhone or head over to tyt.com/join.